Hello and welcome to our Security Center 5.7 Upgrade Training Webinar video. In this video, we're going to cover all the topics you need to know for the GA and SR1 releases of 5.7. Topics will be covered using a series of slides as well as demonstrations on a live system. So looking at the agenda for the presentation today, we're going to go over three sections for Security Center. We're going to go through the platform, the Omnicast video section, and the Synergist access control section. So the platform, of course, is anything that sort of is all-encompassing and is used in multiple parts of Security Center. And just to note as well, we're going to talk about features that are in Security Center 5.7 GA, and we're also going to cover ones that have been added in the recently released SR1. So if you take a look down here at the bottom, we've got this little symbol here, the SR1 symbol. So if you see that, then you know that's a feature that's only been added as of SR1. As well, during the presentation, if you look here on the side, I've got a handy little table of contents. And if you need to go back and watch the video later, because of course this will be posted on our YouTube channel, and you need to skip forward to a certain section, you can use this table to see what part we're at in the video. Our little spot here is going to move down through the table of contents, so that way you can just skim through the video and see when the spot lands on the part that you want or close to it, then you know that you're where you want to be. So looking at the things we're going to cover today, we're going to start off taking a look at some of the enhancements in the alarms that have been added. After that, we have a few things we've added to Plan Manager that are pretty cool. We'll take a look at a few security and federation enhancements after that, and then some general user interface, user experience things that have been changed or added as of 5.7. And as well, we're going to go through web client and mobile, anything there, and then some general features that don't really fit into any particular category but need to be mentioned just the same. After that, we've got a few Omnicast things we're going to take a look at, starting with a really cool new feature, the Quick Visual Search, or the Quick Search. And this is really nice for if you're trying to find something in a video that should be there, but that's not, or is there now and shouldn't be. So that's something we'll go through. As well, again, any general features, something that's, you know, doesn't fit into any category, that's overall a nice feature but doesn't have a place for it. A couple of federation things as well. We've got federation in these two, but there's some federation things that are more global, and there are other ones that are really just for video, so that's why I broke those up into two separate sections here. And then we'll take a look at, there's just a few manufacturer specific things for different types of cameras and video units, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And the end, I just want to bring up the Kiwi Vision Analytics. This is a much larger topic that we don't have the bandwidth for today to actually look at everything in detail in terms of setting up the two new Kiwi Vision analytic plugins and roles that we have set up in 5.7 now. But we will have more things coming soon for that, so fear not. And we also have some things on tip for Kiwi Vision as well. So if you do want to jump in and use the Kiwi Vision features right away, there is documentation out there for you. Now finally, on the access control side, we didn't have a whole lot of stuff here. There's some important things, of course, but I didn't want to break the video into, or the webinar into platform and video and platform and access control, because there just wouldn't be enough to really warrant that on the access control side. So I'm including it here in the video today. We're just going to take a look at everything, starting with the failover for the access manager. Now this is something that previously seemed to exist, but it's 100% now. So we've included that as a what's new in 5.7, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later. Again, some general features for Synergist. And then some things that have changed in terms of manufacturers and supported units, things like that. And then finally, we're going to take a look at a really nice new feature on the access control side, which is temporary access rules. Now, if at any point there's any problem with the audio or the video or anything like that, please go ahead and let me know in the comments. I've got them up over here on my side. I'm taking a look once in a while, and if there's anything that comes up, please feel free to let me know. Okay, so jumping into the platform section. So again, I mentioned this is anything that something that can be used in the video side and the access control side, even the auto view side, things like schedules and alarms and stuff like that. That's really used not for one specific purpose within Security Center. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is the alarm enhancements, as I mentioned. So the first one that's kind of nice is we have an auto-acknowledge feature on an archiving issue. So we're going to take a look at this a little bit later, but we do have a new recording problem event that comes up. So really what happens is if something happens with the archiver and it can't record, but it's not a expected response. So if the camera gets to the end of its recording schedule and it turns off, that's an expected stop in the recording. If there's a problem with the database or a problem with the storage, that's not expected. So now we have a new state for that, and that actually changes the icon here too. What we can do is we can actually trigger an alarm based on this event, of course. So we get the recording problem event, and we trigger an alarm, camera not recording. And then what we can do next is, of course, if it goes back to a regular recording state, so it goes recording on or recording off, then that is a normal state, and that's basically going to satisfy the condition that we need to acknowledge the alarm. So this means we can automatically acknowledge it, and we won't have to deal with that alarm if the problem is no longer present. So it's a nice thing to have this alarm pop up to let you know we really need to take a look at the archiver right now. But again, if you fix it, then you're not going to have to go through and acknowledge all these alarms. Moving on, we previously we could have a condition, a switch to create an incident on acknowledgement of an alarm. So these are the traditional incidents where it pops up a window and it asks you for more information on what was involved in terms of entities, any video that's involved, what happened during this incident, and then it saves that as a report that you can review later. So this can be done, as I mentioned, on alarms, but now we actually have a way to create one incident if we have multiple alarms that are acknowledged at the same time that all have this this flag turned on, this create incident on acknowledgement flag. So in this example here, so we have 3 alarms that we have triggered. They've all been taken care of, so we highlighted all 3. I just clicked here, shift click there, and then I click on my acknowledge here. And from there it pops up my window, my report an incident window. So I give the title and I give the description, put it in a category, and of course it's, instead of having to do 3 because I had 3 alarms, it's just going to take this one, and it actually tells me on top here that this using 3 alarms for this particular incident, and it's going to just create one incident for it and have to and not have to create all these extra incidents for any alarms that we're acknowledging. So a nice time saver here. And of course the other thing that's nice to note, and something that has been added as well, is that under the references we do actually have the alarms listed too. So we can add other references as well if we need to. If we need to add a camera here, we can do that. But the references are automatically listed. And this is for any incident where we have it created based on an alarm. Now it will be listed in the references, a nice little automatic feature here. And of course, if we run a report, if we want to look at our incidents, we have our incidents report here running, and we do have those references here. So that's something nice that we can see. Okay, so another thing that we've added in terms of alarms is that we can actually add context information to an active alarm. So while we have an alarm active, so I'm in my alarm monitoring task here, and I have a door forced open alarm, I can go down here and I can edit the context, and it's going to pop up this window here. And in this window, I can actually type in whatever information I need to add more detail to the present alarm that is currently being investigated by our operators. So this, of course, we can add information to it. If we edit the context again, we can change that information. If we find out more details, we can add those to the context as well. And then, of course, that gets saved with the alarm and can be viewed later. Another new thing is the under investigation state. I'm going to say sort of new, because previously we did have this this feature available, but it was only ones that were alarms that were under linked to an external event that we could use under investigation for. So basically, if it came up, the only way to acknowledge it was to have the acknowledging condition triggered on the system. So now this is a nice visual way for your operators. If you have a large team that's looking at alarms actively, you may need to say, okay, so-and-so is working on this one, you're working on this one. But if somebody just steps in, they're not going to know, which alarms are taken. So now what we can do is we can highlight an alarm, and under the drop-down we can say investigate, and that way if somebody's looking for an alarm to manage, they know which ones are currently in process and handled by current users or operators. So that's a nice manual feature that's been added here. Looking at a quick example of this, we have a few alarms here, and we have the create incident on acknowledgement checked for them. From our alarm monitoring task, we have 3 active alarms, and we're going to select 2 of them by using the control click or shift click, and then hit the acknowledge button. When the incident creation window pops up, we can type in all the information we need, and both alarms will be associated with the incident. We can see when we acknowledge an alarm that the alarm entity is included in the references as well. Still in the alarm monitoring task, here we can see how we can edit the alarm context to add more information. Okay, so let's move on. We're going to talk about Plan Manager now. So the first thing that we've added in the config tool is the camera coverage tool. While you're editing a map in the map designer, if you click on the map section here, we have this show field of view coverage. And what's nice about this is basically it'll highlight the fields of view in a very solid color instead of the gradient that you usually see. So this way you can really see where your cameras are seeing and what can be seen by them. And as well for your PTZs, it's going to highlight the entire area around it. So not just the current cone, it's going to give the entire area so you can see based on the rotation what can be viewed by that PTZ camera. So it's nice to use if you're checking your walls that you've set up in your system and to make sure that you've got everything blocked off that you need to. Let's take a quick look at an example of the camera coverage tool. When we have it enabled, we can see the field of view areas covered, which takes into account any walls that we have configured. Another thing that we've added is a drag to zoom feature. So if you're in the map designer task, or if you're actually looking at a map tile as well, you can hold down the control key and you can drag out a box like I've done in this case, and it's going to try to fit that box into your tile window. So of course the zoom levels still apply, so it can't zoom into a level that it doesn't have a predefined zoom level for. So in this case you can see it's a little bit outside of the range that I specified, but the next zoom level in would actually be too much and I wouldn't be seeing everything that I've put in the rectangle here. So it's going to get as close as possible, and of course the more depth you have to your maps, the more zoom levels you have, the more detailed they are, then you will get closer to the rectangle you're drag out to. Going back to our live system, here's how we can use the zoom feature to quickly zoom in on a specific area we're working on. As well, we've added map presets. So in the map designer task, we have a little eyeball icon here, and you can add presets to it. So I've added a few here, my AE PTZ, my fixed cameras, and I can click here and add another preset if I want to. And it's going to prompt me for the name, and it's going to take a snapshot of what I'm looking at currently in my map designer task window. So then when I'm in my tile itself, then I can click on the same icon and I can choose either the home position, which is the default view, and of course that can be set, and I can also choose one of the ones that I created here. And of course, if you take a look on the side here, we do have keyboard shortcuts for them too. So if you want to go to the home view on the map, then you hit Control-0, and every preset you add after that, it's going to add, in this case, Control-1, Control-2, and keep going. Looking back at our map designer task on our live system, let's say we want to add a preset near our PTZ camera. We can zoom in on the camera, and then we can add the preset, so we can always go to this location and zoom level. So mentioning that, we do have a few new navigation buttons that we've added if you're looking at a tile. So we can zoom in and zoom out using the navigation buttons here. This is where we can get our presets that we just looked at. And we also have the smart click here. So basically, if you turn on the smart click, if you click on it, it'll show like this, that it's enabled. And then you go anywhere on the map and you click somewhere that's within a camera view, and it's going to populate your other tiles with any cameras that can see that point that you clicked on. And of course, it's going to take your walls and everything that you've set up on your map into account too, anything that's blocking a field of view. And if there's any PTZs that are within that view, it will actually rotate around to see that point, to look at that point on the map. So that's a quick feature to, if an incident happens and you know it's somewhere on a map, you can click on it and then your cameras will be populated and your PTZs will be facing the incident too. In terms of input zones and intrusion detection areas, we've added a few things to the identity tab for them in the map designer task. So the first thing we can do, if we show the states here, we can actually change the colors depending on the state. So in this case, I have an input on a camera selected, and if it's normal, I want the input to show as green. If it's active, I want it to show as red. And if there's a trouble state coming from it, I want that to show up in yellow on my map. As well, what we can do is we can change the visibility. So in case this is an input that's set up to monitor something that we're not usually going to see activity from, we don't want this cluttering up our map perhaps. So in this case, we can go into the states and I can uncheck the normal condition here, and that way once I apply that, once I save the change, that input is no longer going to show up on the map. So this is in the configuration. I'm looking at it here. You can see I've got my my field of view tool turned on here, and in the actual tile it doesn't actually show up because it is in a normal state. So if it went active, I flip the switch or whatever it's connected to, then we would see the red input show up right here. If it was in a trouble condition, I still have those two checked right here, and that would show up yellow here as well. So this is a nice way to unclutter your map and keep things a little bit more visually easy to look at for your operators while they're working on things, and not having to deal with an excessive number of inputs and zones and things like that, unless of course they're actually needed. So that's a nice bit of flexibility here. Let's set up an input on our live system. We have the entity added to the map already, so let's set up the states for it. We'll leave the color set to the default values, but we're going to manage the visibility. In this case, we only want the input to show up when it's in an active state. Once we have it configured, we can see this from the security desk. Now, we had some icon customizations before. That was mostly limited to cameras. Now we have a lot more added to that. So in this case, I added an alarm to my map, my unarmed conflict alarm, and I can go in and I can use the icon drop down and I can browse to a new file, and I'm going to change it to this little ball of fire here. So that way, when I look on my map, I'm actually seeing this custom icon for the alarm. But of course, if I click on it, it behaves exactly like a regular alarm would. And bear in mind, of course, that this is applied to the object and the entity. So if I go back to my area view over here, or my alarms view, I'm going to see that icon for the alarm itself too. So that's applied across the board. Taking a look at our live system, one additional thing we can do is add a zone as an icon instead of a shape. We can just drag the zone onto the map from the area view, and we can change the icon from here if we want. Otherwise, we can draw the shape as usual and assign it to a zone. Another nice new thing, and you might have noticed this on my map before, is we do have the elevation taken into account on the maps now. So I actually have a shape defined right here, and within that shape I gave it an elevation of 4 meters, and I said block field of view, which is why you can see the cone isn't going outside of it, but my camera itself is 5 meters up. So that means the camera is going to actually see over this shape. So it's 4 meters, the camera is at 5 meters, it's going to look over it. And that's well represented on the map at this point. On a city map, this is particularly important if you have cameras on the tops of buildings, and then you can represent the buildings around it appropriately with their own individual heights, and the elevation is taken into account when displaying the field of view cone on the map. So that's a nice thing that they added here. We mentioned PTZs before and being able to see the cone and the entire area that it's seeing. But prior to 5.7, we really didn't have any kind of idea of actively what the PTZ was looking at. So when you put it on the map, you weren't sure, is that really looking at what it's looking at now? And may have been harder to line up too. So now it actually does reflect that data. So if the PTZ is feeding coordinates back to Security Center and it does know the orientation of the PTZ camera, then it will be represented in the config tool in the map designer task. So I'm looking at my map designer right here, and I can see my PTZ is pointing this way. And then when I look in the actual tile, indeed, that is exactly what it's doing. So nice little visual representation, and that will help set up PTZs on your map a little bit easier. Now there's a few things that they've added to the copy configuration tool, and you may have noticed the tool section moved as well. But one of the first ones that they added was in Plan Manager. We can actually copy the map settings from one area to another. So within the copy configuration tool, the entity type, we choose area, of course, because that's what we're associating the map to. I want to choose my source area. And then under the options, of course, the only thing we can copy for an area at the moment is the map information. So that's grayed out because that's the only thing we can do. Why else would we be doing this? And that is checked. And then, of course, we pick the destination areas and things like that. So this is nice if you're setting up something with, let's say you have a map and you need to do it in multiple languages, or if you need to use a map as a template and you've got the entities on it you need to. and then you can just copy it to a final one. That would be a good use for it as well. And another thing too, from within the map itself, we can actually copy and paste the objects either within the same map, or we can copy and paste them to other maps too. So in this case, I have my 4th floor and 3rd floor maps. If I wanted to copy a camera from object from my 4th floor map onto my 3rd, I can just highlight it, Control C, go into my 3rd floor map, Control V, and boom, there's my camera. So that's a few nice things to help with the setup and configuration of Plan Manager. Now I mentioned the Smart Click before. We also have the Smart PTZ Zoom. When we have the Smart Click enabled here, so we see the little the blue highlight on it, then what we can do is we can actually drag a rectangle onto our map within the tile, and then it's going to take all of that area into account. So if there's a PTZ camera that's coming in along here, it's going to be taken into account, and it's going to try to focus on that point here. So the cone, the field of view, total field of view for this PTZ camera, if we remember, it went all the way around here, and this is of course within the within that range. So it picks up this camera and is pointing it towards the center of the box that I drew out. So that's another cool way to use the Smart Click. And as we can see, this is a feature that was added in 5.7 SR1. Taking a quick look at a couple of security things that we've added. Nice thing on top in the notification tray is for firmware updates. So the Genetec update service will now review the firmware on your units, and if there's any that have any kind of, as we can see here, a security vulnerability, or if there's an upgrade to the firmware that's recommended, it will give you that little notification here telling you there's some action that needs to be required. So if you click on it, you do have the option to open the hardware inventory report, and then it's going to tell you the firmware description, so why we want to change the firmware, and the new version that would be recommended to go up to. A couple other things in terms of privileges. Previously there were some privileges that were exclusive to the administrators group. So this means that you couldn't assign them to anybody else. If you wanted somebody to have these privileges, you had to make them an administrator. The problem with that, of course, is you give them access to one, you give them access to all. So what we did is we kind of broke those down a bit and made it a little bit more granular. So if you do have a a very high level operator and you do want them to be able to do something with the roles, for instance, you can give them that privilege now and not give them carte blanche for the whole system. So this is a nice way to really keep your users doing the tasks they need to do without giving them excessive security rights. As well, we were just looking at Plan Manager. There's a few things they've changed there. So in terms of the connections to the Map Manager role, we're now using claim-based authentication. And as well, another thing they've done for security is that the federated maps are available at the federation level. So instead of having to go all the way across and connect to the federated site, the user can get the map from the federation level and not have so much exposure to the actual federated site. So that's a nice little thing there. Going over to see a quick example, one of the things I could add to my regular user here is the ability to add a role. However, since we've broken down the privileges into a more granular level, I could decide I don't want them to be able to delete roles. Okay, so moving on to our federation section, we have a few nice things here that we've added, one of them being custom entity names. So previously when we imported a list of entities from our federation system into our system, we had the same names that we had on both sides, and there's nothing we could do about that. So really, in terms of keeping things cleaner when you've got something federated, we've added the ability to actually give it a custom name. So if you go into the Identity tab for your federated entity, I have a federated PTZ here, you can see the original name is still here. So if I need to do maintenance or I need to call somebody on the other side and ask them about a particular camera, I can still refer to the original camera name on the host system. So the original name here is the AE Vestibule PTZ, but I renamed it on my system to the AE Doorcam because I find that easier for my operators, for instance, and we may have a different naming convention, and that way it would fit in a little bit better. So this is something that they can do, and of course you can clear it, you can change it if you need to, and that doesn't affect anything on the host side too. So the host is still going to have their name, and you can't force anything back over or anything like that. And one other tiny thing to add for federation, well, not tiny, but is we now support federating ArcGIS maps. So now we can share the maps that are using Esri's ArcGIS as their GIS map server. So that can be for Plan Manager, it can be for AutoView, whatever you need to use it for. Now you can actually share those maps over Federation. All right, so there's some cool new things in the user interface. That's the flashy, most interesting one I think right now is the visual reporting. So this is something cool where before we had charts and data and numbers and text and everything, and that's all good for some things, but sometimes you really need to see your results to really know what's going on. And if you look, some of them now, this isn't available for everything, but a lot of them have this visual reporting, and you're going to see the little graph icon here. So if you click on that, it's going to flip it into the graphical results mode, and of course we can change a few things like whether we want to show the top 10 or the top 5. We can choose what type of graphical report we have. There's quite a few available, and of course we can choose what we want to display. So right now I'm in my alarm report, and I can see here how many unarmed conflicts I have, how many of the camera enclosure problem here, the door forced open. So I get a better idea, and then I can actually click on here, and I chose donut, because who's going to say no to a donut, right? And then I can really see how many in total I have in terms of my top 10 alarms, and if I hover over one, it's going to give me individual numbers and percentages here. So then I can really see that, oh yeah, unarmed conflict is the alarm we're getting the most triggers on. And then after that, we're looking at the enclosure problem here. So it really is a nice visual way to show things, and as well just to pop things up like that. And if you're looking for any problems or trends on your system, this is a very easy way to see that immediately just by pulling up one of these visual reports. And as I mentioned, it's available for most. There's some that don't have it if it's not relevant. And if you need to go back and see the actual data, you can just flip back to it from here too. Looking at our alarm report, let's change this to a graphic chart. First a line chart by default, and then we can select bar charts, and then finally a donut chart. Another cool thing they've added is layouts as an entity. So basically when we're configuring our canvas, we're modifying the layout. We can make it a 9-tile, a 4-tile. We can drag certain cameras in different places. And then what we can do is we can actually right-click on our tab for a monitoring task, and we can do Save as Layout. If this has already been saved, we can update it as well. So that's nice too. It's not just a static thing that you fire and forget here. So once I do the Save as Layout, I choose where I want to save it, because this is going to show up in the area view here. So you can see I've already created a 4-view one here. That's the layout icon that you'll see. So in this one I had 3 tiles, and I had the map very prominent, so I'm going to call that my 3-tile map view. And that way, if I want to call that up later, I can do so. If I'm in the monitoring task, I can just double click on it, or I can drag it into the canvas, and it's going to repopulate everything exactly the same way as I had saved it when I saved this layout. Another really cool thing is this can actually be accessed from Plan Manager too. So if I have the layout on a map, it's in the area view, so I can drag it onto my map, I can save it there, and then if I click on it, it brings up the same tile as you have for a video, and it's going to basically run through the cameras that are in my layout like a sequence. So that's a very easy thing to do. And if you have your map in one tile, you can actually click on that that layout icon, the object, drag it into your canvas, and it's going to repopulate everything the same way as you saved it. So this is a very cool, easy way to for having custom layouts. And if you switch between watching one set of cameras to another very quickly, this is a nice way of doing that and keeping everything stored and localized. So that's and to make using Plan Manager even more efficient too, since you can just view it from there. Going back to our live system, we have a layout currently in the canvas, but I want to use a previously configured one, so I can just drag the entity onto the canvas, and it loads the tile pattern and contents as they were when that layout was saved. We can modify this and save it as a new layout, and then if we make some changes to the canvas, we can return to our saved configuration by dragging it onto the canvas again. Okay, talking about emails, prior to 5.7, whenever we used an email action, like send an email, we were kind of limited to what we could say in that email. So if it was a very specific action based on a specific event, yeah, we could put in the email that, you know, we had a fight break out, but we couldn't really give much more information than that. So now what we've actually done is in the email action, send an email action, we can actually choose other things. So in this case, I'm setting up an event to action. I chose who the email is going to go to. And then here I have an edit email button. So what that pulls up is the subject and the message. We've got a few new graphical things we can do to really you know, accentuate the email a bit more. But you'll see we have these little field drop downs here. And from the field we can choose a few different things. So originally in the subject I wrote door forced open because I just want this to be a generic email sent out whenever any door is forced open. So I chose the field, and I chose that I want the actual source entity name to show up in here. So I pulled that up under my door entity here, because this is of course what I'm triggering it on. And then in the body of the email, I went through and I wrote, please note the event, clicked on field, chose the event name, and then it gives you that little the little variable here. So event name happened on, and then I chose the source entity name at, and I chose my event timestamp. So now whoever's getting this email, which happens to be me, I'm really going to see all the information. I'm going to see if the door forced open on the main front door, the subject in the message is going to be door forced open on main front door, and that may grab my attention more than just a generic email. And then of course when I'm looking at it, I'm going to see it's a door forced open, it's the main front door, and this happened at 11:25 p.m. on a Tuesday night, let's say. So it's a lot more information that we can see from there, and that's something that's very, very cool. So showing how we can configure this, we can set up a new event to action, and then on the email action we can use the fields to make the email more descriptive, and we can use some style features here as well. Moving on in the user experience, so we now have, I mentioned the copy configuration tool before, that we've added a few things to it. So another thing we can copy from there is actually the visual tracking information. So if we choose camera as the entity type, there's a step in between, of course. We choose which camera, and then under the options, we can now choose visual tracking. Now, what it's going to copy in this case is the areas that we've got set up under the visual tracking configuration for that camera. So when we define areas and we give it a color and we give it a transparency, and then we link it to a particular camera, it's going to copy that the boxes that we have set up and the colors and the transparency. It's not going to copy the links, however. So it's good for making a template. So let's say in your camera you want boxes on the top left, top right, bottom left, and bottom right, and that's going to be for every camera on your system, and it's going to go to different cameras from there. To keep everything very circular and keep everything very accessible from within the visual tracking function while you're viewing a camera. You could just set that up on one and copy it to all the others, and then you just have to go ahead and change the camera links or add the camera links, because that's not going to get, you're not going to have the same thing on every camera anyways. So you might as well copy the visual configuration and then just put the links in yourself. So that's something nice that's been added there. Another thing visually is prior to 5.7, in some tasks where we could view video from a tile, we weren't getting the same menus as we would from the monitoring task. So an effort has been made to really kind of make that a little bit more uniform. So if you go into your monitoring task and you right click on a camera that you're viewing and you go in the camera tab and you have a list of options, if you go into Plan Manager and you do the same thing, you're going to see the same list of options. So that's something that will keep you from having to do a lot of flipping back and forth or hunting for a feature from within something other than the monitoring task. So that was a nice cleanup thing they did there. So let's move on to our web client and mobile section here. So under the web client alarm management, if you take a look while you're monitoring cameras in the web client, we can now do a bunch of alarm functions here. So we can trigger an alarm from here. I can choose which one. I can trigger it from here. And of course, if I do have any alarms triggered, so let's say I chose the door forced open and I triggered it, I will now have an icon appear, and I can do a lot more with the alarms within the web client. So I'm going to see that it's my door forced open. I can play the video if that's available. I can acknowledge the alarm. I can investigate it, and there's other features. So that's from the menu button right here on the alarm. So if I did have other ones, I could acknowledge one and investigate another, and it really gives us a lot more things we can do from within the web client in terms of alarms. Threat levels as well. We can activate, deactivate, and manage our threat levels from within the web client too. So if we're looking in the menu here, I just chose the little cheeseburger thing, and on the bottom here we do have our threat levels. So right now I don't have one active, but if I click on this, I'm going to see my threat levels. I can set one for the system. or I can set specific ones for particular areas. So I mentioned before I have my 3rd floor and 4th floor area, and let's say we have a low level, just a level 1 threat on the 4th floor. I can set that. I can use the X to clear it if I need to, and I can set a higher level one on the 3rd floor and have them independent. And I'm doing all this from the web client, so I don't have to be logged into the full security desk to do this. And of course, if everything's all clear, I can just reset all from here too. So really anything you need to do with threat levels in terms of an operator side, we can do that from the web client now. Configuration, no, that of course has to be set up on the config tool side, but this is a big step forward for the operators. And speaking of threat levels, we actually have a mobile threat level app. So this is basically what it looks like here. I pulled one from another system, but basically we have an app available for iOS, and now it's available for Android as well. And we can manage the threat levels using your phone or your iPad or whatever mobile device you're using. You do need to have GSC Mobile 4.1 SR4, and then you can just download the app, and once you load it, you can go in and you can change the threat level right from your phone. So this is nice if you do have, let's say, a guard that's out patrolling and he sees something. He can just pull out his phone, he can pull up the threat level and app, and then he can set the threat level right away, which of course can trigger a whole bunch of other things happening on the system. That's the whole point of threat levels, is for visibility and notification and getting things going as quickly as possible when there's an actual threat happening. Just one other minor note from the mobile side, we do have improved functionality for tablets for viewing video as well. So this is for the web client on iOS or Android, and no, this is an SR1 feature. Okay, so I'm loving the copy configuration tool, it seems. So we're back to that, and one other thing we can do from here is we can actually copy the security desk configuration. So what we're doing here is in the copy configuration tool is we're choosing user as the type. We choose the source as the particular user, so myself. And then under the options, we now have security desk settings. Sorry, that's a little small, but that's what it says, trust me. And then basically, if I have my my security desk set up in a particular way, and it's very efficient, and I like the way it works, and my coworker comes along and says, "Oh wow, I really like the way you have it set up. That seems really good. You know, can I use the same thing?" He doesn't have to go through, or she doesn't have to go through and change all the settings themselves. We can just go in the copy configuration tool and copy the security desk settings over from me to the other person or people. So that would be another way to set up a group of operators, for instance, to all have the same thing, or a subset of operators to have a different type of security desk configuration. So that's something nice there as well. And in terms of another general feature for looking at the audit trail, before when we were looking at camera sequences, we would see a whole mess of stop and starts based on the cameras that are included in that sequence. So to clean things up and make it a little bit more efficient, it's only going to show the stop and start of the sequence itself and not the granular ones for the cameras. So that will help make things a little bit more visually easier to see. Okay, I'm going to go into the Omnicast video section here. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is, this is ridiculously cool. It's the quick search. So what this can do is really be able to, as I mentioned in the intro, find something that should be there and isn't, or something that is there now that shouldn't be. So if you have a video stream and you need to see, you know, wait a minute, where did that bag come from? Who put that there? you can really see, using this visual search, find the video for that incident very, very quickly. So just looking at my example here, I've pulled up a camera from my office, and in the widget now we have the quick search here. So we can click on the quick search, and it's going to bring up this pop-up window, and it's going to basically give a preview of the window of what's going on, what it's seeing right now. And I'm going to drag a rectangle over the region of interest. So where I'm looking to find out if something changed, that's what I want to see. I don't want to go too large because it is analyzing for any changes in the video within that particular region of interest. So in this case, I'm highlighting the jackets here because I want to see, okay, when did somebody come in, or when was there any change to the jackets there. So I did that here, and then looking at once I hit start, it brings up these series of frames, and there's a little magnifying glass between each one that you'll see, and it's giving me the time range too, and it's showing me, okay, this is a frame from each time. At that time when I'm seeing there's some kind of difference here, and if I need to go forward a bit or go backward a bit, I can do that. And if I click on the magnifying glass here, it's actually going to expand that and show me more frames from within those two particular frames. So if I drill down a little bit using the magnifying glasses here, I can eventually see, oh, I'm nothing, the door is open actually, and then there's somebody here, and then there's a jacket here. So then I can drill down a little bit more, and I'll actually see, oh, there's somebody coming in. Happens to be me, but and then I want to see the video from that time. So I just have to hover over the frame itself, click on the play button, and then it immediately jumps to that section of the video, and I can see exactly if somebody put something there or took something away, or what happened there. And this, it takes literally seconds to find something using this. It's a beautiful feature. And then of course this is just a regular tile playback. There's no pop-up or anything. It just jumps you into playback mode right from where you want to be, and you can export video. You can see the context of what's going on, and do any kind of actions needed here. Let's go back to my office in the live system and look for who moved my microphone away from my desk. We can define the search area and then expand our search between two frames until we see a difference in where there may be activity. Once we click on the frame showing a difference, like in here, we can jump to video at that time, and we can see that it was actually me that did it and completely forgot. Okay, so moving on, we're going to looking at PTZ presets. So previously, when we had a camera in a tile, we had a PTZ camera in there. We had to go over to the widget to pull up the presets, or use a menu option here. But if it's a camera and you really are jumping from one preset to another very quickly, or depending on the situation, you're really covering a lot of area with this camera, we figured it'd be really nice to have those actually in tile controls, and that's what we've added here. So if you have a PTZ camera pulled up, this isn't going to show up on fixed, of course. You're going to see the little eyeball icon at the end of your pop-up tools in the tile. So if you click on it, it's going to give you a list of all your presets if you've named them here. I've creatively used untitled for the name of every PTZ preset in here. So from here, I can just click on it and then select the preset. It'll go to whatever preset. If I need to switch over to something else, I can use the same thing. And of course, this is something that we can use in anything that has a camera tile. So I can do that from Plan Manager too. So this is my example here. I've pulled up a camera in Plan Manager, and I still have that eyeball, and I can choose one of my creatively titled, untitled presets. So that's something nice to, for the operators to really be able to jump around with the PTZ real quick. Back in our live system, here's a few examples of activating some PTZ presets, both from a tile in the monitoring task and from a pop-up camera window in Plan Manager. I mentioned this right at the beginning, but we do have a new recording notification. So if we get an archiver issue and the archiver stops for any unexpected reason, such as a storage problem or a database issue, we do have a new icon. I've highlighted here a little bit because it's kind of ghosted out in the screenshot. But you'll see that in your recording button on the tile, in the tile controls. So usually it's black if it's not recording, it's red if it is recording. But the black spot is really for a normal stopped state. If you see this exclamation point here, it means the camera's not recording, but that's because there's a problem with the actual archiver. And of course, we're going to see that if we have, if we're monitoring the events, we will see like a recording problem event come up here too. And that means you really need to take a look at your archiver. Of course, because it is an event, we can use it in our event to actions and things like that too. A couple of other general features here. So we can limit the number of media gateway connections now. This is something that if you want to set this up, I would recommend looking this up in TIP, the technical information section section of the Genetec portal. So really what this is used for is to keep the media gateway from getting overloaded by too many stream requests. So we can limit the number of connections for each agent. So what we'll need to do is go into the Security Center configuration files folder. We need to open the mediagateway.gconfig file if it's there. If it's not, you need to create it. Just a regular text file, of course. And then this is where we'll need the technical information site, is to get this block of text here. And this is basically where we limit the number of live sessions and playback sessions that we're allowing to go through the media gateway agents. So in here it just puts the variables N1 and N2. So if we set that to 0, that means it's unlimited. We're letting it go. If we put a negative number, that means it's going to block all connections. And otherwise, we can put a real value in here. Now, of course, we're going to need to save this and restart the media gateway role to have it take effect. And if you do this on the server itself, it's applying the changes to everything. But you can actually do this on a single server as well. So if you know that one isn't quite as powerful as the others, you could limit the number of requests that go through that particular machine. All right, another thing we can do is, in case we have the UDP ports that we have set up by default for live streaming, if we need to change the starting port number or the total number of ports, we can change that in the archiver's resources settings. So here I have my archiver. I went into the resources, and I need to expand the server settings here. And then I'm going to see our normal network card here, but we can also see here live streaming reception UDP ports. And it gives the range that it's currently set to. If I hit the pencil icon here, it's going to pop up a menu and show you those ports and ask you any changes you want to make here. So if there's anything that does need to be modified from there, we can do that. Another nice general feature is we do have camera maintenance mode available from the security desk now. This was something we had available from the config tool, but now we can do it from the security desk, but it can be restricted by privileges. So if you don't want all the operators able to do this, you can shut that off for whoever you don't want to. And it's really just simple. You just right-click on the camera, go in the camera menu and choose maintenance mode, set up how long you want it to be enabled for, and then of course the icon's going to have the little cone here, and it's going to change the name of the camera to orange. So that's, you know, it's in maintenance mode, and any event to actions that are set to happen on that particular camera, those are going to be shunted as well. So it's really a true maintenance mode, and keep things from happening while you're working on the camera. Another general feature is if we have a second failover server set up for our archiver, so basically a third server set up for the archiver, this is typically known as the disaster recovery server, we may choose that we don't want to hear about any disk problems that are disk full messages that are coming in. You know, in a disaster recovery situation, when your primary and your backup and servers are down and you're running off your third server, you might run it running hot. You might want it just to, you know, use all the storage and keep as much as it can and do the active cleanup, and we don't want to hear about disk full warnings. So we can actually set that up in the archiver.gconfig file, and just add this line under the in the configuration section. Again, if you need this, this is available on tip. And you can just copy and paste that in there, and then save it and restart the archiver role, and this will take effect from there. A few other things. Audio analytics are now supported, so if we get any events that are coming in from an audio device, that event information will be saved along with the event, and of course we can do any event actions we need to based on these audio analytic events as well. And a nice thing they've added in SR1 is a video feed rotation. So this isn't the same as the image rotation. Image rotation is still there, and that's done on the actual hardware. So if your camera supports image rotation, we recommend using that primarily. But if you need to rotate the image and you can't do it with the camera itself, the hardware isn't designed to do that, we can now use the video rotation to do that. So you just click on it here, and you do have your settings for however you want to turn the camera image. This is being done on the software side, so of course it will add a little bit of load onto the workstation, because it's the workstation that's actually doing the flipping. So really, if the camera can do it, let the camera do it. If not, well, we've got the option. We've got you covered. The only limitations on this is it's not available on PTZ cameras or any like fisheye panamorph lensed cameras, anything that does any kind of like image stitching or things like that. A little too much to handle, so it's not available for those. The next subject we're going to cover is federation in Omnicast. So one of the first things that I want to talk about is the audit trail logging. So when we export video from a federated camera, we now can see who actually exported that on the remote side. So the user that's set up in the federation role is logged as the initiator, and the person on the remote side who's actually exporting the video, they're logged as the original initiator. For this to happen, both sides of the federation do have to be on Security Center 5.7. Another thing in terms of federation is the stream setting. This is another thing where you're going to need to take a look on TIP. We do have an article called Using Default Security Desk Settings to View Federated Cameras. And what this is doing is basically, if we don't want to use the stream that's set up in the federation role, typically that's set up as the remote stream. If we know we have a massive workstation and we have a great network and we can handle whatever camera feed coming in from the federation that's possible, we can flip it over and we can say, I want to use the default stream for regular cameras instead, which is typically the live stream, we can enable that. So basically you modify the general settings.gconfig file on your workstation, and then in the configuration section you can add the line that you can find in the tip article. I didn't include it here because you're not going to be typing anything off the screen anyway, so you'll need to look that up from there anyways, but that's something you can do, and a little modification behind the scenes that you can do. All right, manufacturer specific. I'm just going to skip through these real quick. Access cameras, we can now select the codec based on the stream. So if I have 4 video streams set up on the camera, I can say I want stream 1 and 2 to use the H.264 codec, and I can say I want stream and 4 to use the Motion JPEG stream instead, the codec instead. So this is nice for if you're using streams for particular applications, and you know, in some cases Motion JPEG, you may want to use that for you know, your remote or something like that, where it's a little less dependent on frame drops and things like that. You know, so you can customize it really for your Axis cameras. As well, in SR1, we've added 2 new things for Axis. We've encrypted the H.264 video stream, and as well, if there are any virtual inputs that are set up on the camera, those can be linked to actions in the unit web page. So that's something else that we're supporting here now. Looking at AirCont, we now support HTTPS on some units, and this is something you'll have to set up in the AirCont extension options. Another 2 manufacturers, Panasonic, we've changed the way the keyframe interval can be configured. Before we had to, the minimum value we could set the keyframe interval to was 1 second. So now we can actually do it in values of less than a second if needed. And looking at the Samsung Hanwha enhancements, we now support the H.265 streaming for P-series cameras. Okay, now I mentioned at the beginning with Kiwi, there's 2 new things that we've added here. We have 2 new modules that we've added in 5.7. So in GA, we added the intrusion detector plugin. This is what we're looking at here, where you can set up if you want somebody to be able to cross something and you want that detected. That's something we can set up within Security Center now. And as of 5.7 SR1, we've added the privacy protector as a role as well. So that's a new feature. And as I mentioned, there's a bit of configuration here, and I'm already over time, so we're going to save this for another webinar, video series. There's articles on tip. So there's more information out there right now, and we will be making more information to cover these 2 new Kiwi Vision features that we've added. Okay, so moving on to our access control sections. This is not going to take me very long. I'm guessing another 5 minutes. So the first thing to talk about is the Access Manager failover. So the role previously we did have under the resources section, we had the server list here. We could add servers to it, but it wasn't 100%. So now it is 100%, and any kind of problems that we may have run into with synchronization issues have been resolved, and now we can use the Access Manager high availability for sure on this. Of course, like the other roles that use the same kind of thing in their resources, we don't want to use a local database. We want to make sure the database is shared, and that any server that we add to this list can actually hit that database. As well, in terms of security, if we have a certificate set up for a unit, and that certificate changes, we can reset that from within the unit properties. So we just need to click on the Reset Trusted Certificate here, and then it'll accept a new certificate, and everything will be good to go. So if there are any changes to the certificate, it's not going to hold you back. There's not going to be a lot of maintenance here. Just reset it and you're good to go. A few scalability increases under the general features. So Access Manager scalability for HID. We can now support 100 Vertex V1000 controllers, 2,000 readers managed by V1000 controllers, or 700 readers managed by the Edge Evo and V2000 controllers. For scalability as well, the Global Cardholder Manager really has had a lot of work done on it. It's really impressive what they've done with it. So it now supports up to 250,000 cardholders, and that's an increase from the previous 10,000. So that's a massive increase on the number of cardholders that it can handle. And they really worked on the synchronization process that it goes through as well. So for example, one thing it does now is if you have pictures, it's only synced when it's idle. So the important information gets synced right away, and then things like the pictures, like, okay, that's heavier on the data, so let's put that aside, and once we've got everything done, let's do that afterwards, kind of thing. So it's really much more efficient. It's a great improvement here. Another thing in SR1 that they've added is elevator control from the security desk. So we can do things like override the elevator schedule, which is like the same kind of thing as overriding an unlock schedule. And we can shunt the cab reader from the widget within the security desk too. In terms of hardware, the manufacturer-specific things, for HID, a few enhancements. We've added the mobile credential assignment from within the cardholder management task. So prior to 5.7, if we wanted to use the HID mobile access portal and set up your phone or something like that to be a credential, you had to use that portal for just about everything. So we've moved some of it over into the cardholder management. There is some configuration that does need to be done on the HID mobile access portal still, but it is less dependent on it. So that's a lot easier now for your operators, at least, in terms of setting up those mobile credentials. Another thing that's been added in SR1 is Vertex weekend reader supervision. So now if there's any readers that go offline, we will get a message saying door offline, devices offline. We'll get an event. We can do actions based on that. So that's any weekend reader that's connected to a Vertex controller. Looking at our Mercury side, a few enhancements here, and bear in mind that all of these can happen even if the Mercury panel goes offline from the Synergist Cloud link. So we do have support for OSDP 2.0 secure channel. The duress pin can now be used, and we now have elevator control and visitor escort. This is pretty cool. A couple of things for the ASA Abloy wireless lock enhancements here. So we've added privacy mode, we've added escape and return mode, but I think this is really awesome here is for the Wi-Fi locks, we've actually added a lock battery checking function in here. So basically in the system status, we can pull up, if we look for all health issues for a door, we can actually see if there's a low battery warning coming in on one of the Wi-Fi locks. So that way, if the battery's running out on the locks could be a big problem, and we can keep an eye on it from here. And this is something we could run as like a daily report. And any maintenance that needs to be done on the wireless lock, we can go out with the spare batteries, and everything's good to go. So that's kind of cool. Nice addition there. All right, our last thing I'd like to talk about is our temporary cardholder access. This is something we added in 5.7 SR1, and basically you're setting things up as a regular access rule, but you're allowing this to have a time range selected to it. So let's say we have a research institute, and we have a particular lab that doesn't have completely, not super sensitive information, but you don't want your maintenance team walking in there, whenever they feel like it. But we have a broken light fixture in there. Don't know what they were doing. They broke a light fixture. We need to send the guys in to replace it. But since we don't want to give them access to it all the time, we can make arrangements with the maintenance team and say, okay, when can you guys be in there? When can you have the parts available? They say Thursday between 8 and 5. They say, okay, we can set up this temporary access rule, and we can set it to be only active on Thursday between 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And of course, we can use the picker for the time and dates here, the little quick choose here. And that way, that access rule, we can say it's for only this door, only for the maintenance team, like any other access rule. And then they'll only be able to have access to that door at that time. Once they get it fixed, the next day, after 5 p.m., they won't have access to it anymore. And it's not something you need to set up, right away. Like, oh no, they're going on site, I need to set up an access rule. You do have that activation time. So that's something that's really nice and really good for flexibility in terms of access to your site and your doors on your site there too. Okay, so before I finish, I just want to mention a couple of resources that you can use to get more information. The first one is, of course, the Technical Information Site, or TIP as we lovingly call it. And from here we can really search for videos, documents, articles, any information you need. You can find it through the Technical Information Site. Pretty much anything you can find in the admin guide, you can find in here in an article. Anything that's in the help, the F1 from Security Center, you can find it in here. It's really a uniform batch of information, and you've got various searches you can do from here too. So if you're looking for something, or I've mentioned a few features where you'll need to copy text from into a file, take a look on TIP and you'll be able to find it there. Of course, on YouTube, we have the Genetec training channel. We have the Genetec channel as well, and this is one that we've set up specifically for the training department. It's got our webinars in here, so the webinar we're doing today, I'll be posting that in the next day or two. And you can go back and watch it at a later date, or if somebody's talking about some information, you can say, oh, I watched a webinar on that. Take a look, just search for Genetec Training on YouTube. You can find our channel and you can find the video from there, in there. And of course, finally, the Genetec portal, specifically the technical assistance section. So you can actually get the tip from here if you want to. This is something that we commonly refer to as the GTAP. And from here you can get other information if you have case information you need to find, or anything like that, or any kind of training certificates. If you need to download something, you can find it from here too. That's all the material on 5.7 that we need to cover. We hope you enjoyed the video and found it informative. If you have any questions or need any other information, please feel free to email training@genetec.com. Thank you and have a good day.